Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very senior corporate leader from the world of human resources from Trinidad and Tobago, Georgia Donaldson. Georgia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ash. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Georgia is a leadership coach. She has served as the Chief People Officer for a large manufacturing company and the Country Chief Culture and Human Development Officer for a regional financial group of companies. So, Georgia, my first question is, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what was your motivation to move from human resources to leadership coaching?
Okay, Ash, I grew up in HR. I usually like to tell people that I grew up in HR.
Yeah.
In the days when I started HR, there are lots of people who may have moved from an administrative assistant and you moved up to HR officer, and those days it was personnel. So the personnel officer, I think I might be dating myself now. So that's my background.
Yeah.
I moved up through the ranks, and I came from a background where I saw my mother being in personnel, my aunt being in personnel, two strong women in my life. And I always said to myself, they just seem to love people and they love what they do. And they would come home each day with stories about what happened at work and how they were able to help people. And I think that was part of my DNA.
Oh,
so I grew up in HR, yes. But I still practice HR. I have not left HR because I'm now an HR consultant. So instead of being inside an organization, being employed by an organization, I now work on the outside, helping the organization to build their HR capacity. And I like to say, that my practice now as a leadership coach is an extension of my HR work, which is leadership development.
Fantastic. So let me first ask you questions relating to HR, and then I'll come to coaching. So, you just mentioned, Georgia, about, it used to be called personnel manager. And I remember when I started work in 1979 after business school, there used to be a personnel manager and there used to be an industrial relations manager.
Right.
And that has now evolved. So my first question is, how has the HR role evolved over the past decade? And
That's a good
what
one.
is it that has made the CHRO such an important C-suite role?
Okay, so we talk about that evolution.
Yeah.
And remember the days when the HR, and mainly women, she was the girl Friday. So she would be doing everything, making coffee sometimes as well, doing all the paperwork in the background. But what has been happening over the last 15, 20 years, we're seeing HR more in the forefront, but not necessarily starring the show, but supporting, like supporting actors. So, and then we have seen that the names have changed. So from personnel manager and HR manager to people manager to culture leaders. And we have been seeing the shift, not only in the role, but in the names, really branding it. As your show is called The Brand Called You.
Yeah.
So HR has been branded differently. And what has also happened is that HR people are now sitting at the table. And some HR people are creating the table if they're not invited at the table. So they now have a more strategic focus. So I've been seeing that evolution from Girl Friday now to that person who is sitting at that table, helping to make decisions for the entire organization.
Very well said. Thank you. And Georgia, how do you see technology impacting the future of HR, especially in areas like recruitment and performance management?
Wow, HR and IT, that's a game changer. HR and technology is a game changer for HR. When we even think of like HRIS systems that some HR people use, it's unfortunate that there are still some HR people who have no idea what an HRIS can do for them. It can streamline your systems, and that has been in organizations for many years. When you think now of what generative AI is doing, I mean, I am no longer sitting there starting a job description from scratch all by myself. I can now prompt AI to help me. There are programs that HR people are developing. You don't have to sit for an entire week just thinking about and trying to build that program. You can prompt AI and that will help you. It's also important when you think of things like onboarding and engagement and performance management. The tools now that technology can use to help you in doing that. And it's not replacing what you do, and it's not replacing your creativity. It is enhancing some of the things that you do. So I'm really excited about what it is doing for us, technology is doing for us. It's how we harness it that makes a difference.
Well said. And what, in your view, are some of the biggest challenges HR professionals face today, and how can these be addressed?
Okay. I think one of the biggest things that HR people face is staying relevant. Too many HR professionals are not keeping abreast of what's happening around them in their organization and external to their organization. When was the last time you as an HR professional went on a conference, whether it's virtual or face-to-face? So staying relevant is one of the things, that's a challenge for HR professionals. When I also think of managing the generations, that's another thing that HR professionals are grappling with. Because when you think of some organizations, we have 5 generations in that organization. So HR professionals are now struggling and grappling with, how do I make sure that the HR strategies and policies I have in place are able to meet the needs of these 5 different generations? And the last thing I think of, Ash, is, engagement. How are we engaging people? That's also a challenge. And it relates as well to the generations, but it also relates to the culture of the organization. And the last thing I want to say, the challenge that HR people face now is stepping out of your own way, getting out of your own way. And I can speak from personal experience, there are times when I felt that I was not impacting, but I was standing in my own way and not building and using the confidence that I have. So those are the things I think HR people are facing.
Great response. Thank you. You also spent a lot of time in culture, and you were the country chief culture and human development officer. So my question is, how can a leader foster a positive company culture? And what role can HR play in this?
But culture really is, who we are, what we do from day to day. And in an organization, it's your environment. It's how you create that environment. It's your policies. It's the way you conduct your meetings. It's the way you deal with people and treat people. So a leader first has to look at him or herself. How do I view people? How would I want to be treated? What are the things that I'm doing to ensure that people are comfortable? So that culture starts with that leader, making sure that you are acting the way that you're speaking about, and make sure you're being that person who you want to see in that organization. And how can HR support that? We can hold our leaders accountable. We can also make sure we share information with our employees. We can also make sure that we're upholding the values of the organization, not only in word, but in action. So the programs that we build them around the values of the organization. And I think if HR people start supporting leaders more, then we will start seeing a change in that culture.
Very well said. My next question is on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, the whole world is talking about DEI today. And yet I've spoken to several women leaders who now are in the boardroom. And I said, you have a place. Do you have a voice?
Yes.
And more often than not, the response is not yet. I want to ask you, what is your view on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And where does accountability lie for implementing DEI?
Ash, that's a good one. And that's one that I've thought about. I remember last year I had to do a talk for a conference, and it was something on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I remember the phrase that says, variety is the spice of life. And I translate that now into diversity is the spice of life. Can you think of an organization if all of us were the same, how boring that would be?
Absolutely.
It's so important to have the different voices in the room, the different faces in the room, the different cultures in the room. And how do we do that as HR people? When we're in that room, instead of focusing on who is in the room, think of who is not in the room and ask questions. Why aren't they in the room? So whether it's a young leader who has not had that opportunity to speak in that meeting, find out why that leader was not invited to the meeting. Are you seeing a room full of only women? Where are the men in the room? Ask those questions. And I think as HR professionals, if we start asking more questions, we'll start making sure that we're impacting change.
Well said. One more question relating to HR, and then I want to move to coaching.
Yes.
Given your amazing experience as such a senior HR leader, can you talk of an interesting an innovative HR practice that you implemented that had a significant impact on the organization? And I don't want names, of course, of any company.
Of course not. Ash, when you talk about innovation, you're taking me back. I see innovation two ways. I see innovation as something new that maybe you bring to an environment. I also see innovation as adding something that's already there, adding to something that's already there. So embellishing it, making it better, making it new and different. And when I think of my own journey in HR and innovation, I was able to innovate an onboarding process that was not yet in place. And what it did, it not only impacted the person who came into the organization or the people coming in, but it also had a ripple effect on the people who had to welcome those people in the organization. Because what happened as a result of that onboarding process, they had to have conversations, which maybe they would never have had before. They had to learn about the organization. They had to understand the policies and procedures. So it was an all-encompassing process. And so that helped. So that's one. And then there is a leadership development program that I conceptualized. And what I did, I built it around the values of the organization. And the feedback from the leaders was that because of how it was structured, they had to have peer-to-peer conversations. And then they also had a coach, an external coach. And that just helped to really make sure that their leadership was sound and impacting people. So those are two innovations that I could recall. Fantastic. That I think maybe impacted people in the organization.
Thank you. Fantastic. So let's now talk about your other avatar as a leadership coach.
Yes.
When you talk to so many leaders and you coach them, what are some common challenges that leaders face today? And how do you help leaders overcome this?
One of the things I've been seeing over the last few years dealing with some of these leaders is their own perceived inability to handle change. How do they manage change and lead change? Because some of them are not only managing the change, they're leading the change. And they don't feel like they have that capacity and that confidence to lead that change. And one of the things I do with them is I ask them to go back and look in their own lives and when they have gone through changes and what worked and what didn't work. And to recall the things that worked and how can they replicate that. Because remember, as a coach, I'm not instructing and I'm not telling. I'm asking questions and giving them new ways to think about it and get new perspectives. So that's one of the things, leading change. But I also see very often managing conflict as one of the things leaders, because they shy away from it. They don't want to approach, they don't want to talk. And so I also ask them to look at the impact that conflict is having in the organization. And if you are not to do something, what's going to happen to that organization? So it's really a matter of giving them that space to think of options and to see things from a different perspective.
Well said. My next question is, how important is feedback when it comes to leadership development? And how do you as a coach facilitate this process?
Yes. I remember a former CEO of mine who would always say feedback is a gift. And I borrowed that from him. Feedback is a gift. And when I'm speaking with my coaching clients, I remind them of how important feedback is, and for them to view it as a gift and not criticism and as not something that's tearing them down. And even in my own practice, I mirror that and I model it because I want to make sure that I'm listening carefully and getting their feedback as to how the process is working for them. So people generally avoid giving feedback. And as a leader, it's important that you ask for it. But how you ask for it makes a whole difference because you can be specific to say, we had that meeting this morning. How did it land on you when I said so and so? So these are the types of ways that we can, encourage leaders to use feedback as a gift. And the last thing I want to say about feedback is the peer-to-peer feedback, because many times you get feedback from the person who you report to or the person who reports to you, but you don't often get that feedback from your peer. So it's important to have that latitude to get the feedback from those who are at your level.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is, how do you integrate business psychology into your coaching practice?
Business psychology is so near and dear to me. Ash, when I think the best gift I gave to myself in the last 10 years was doing that master's program in business psychology. It opened my eyes, you know, and it might sound cliche, but it was really mind-blowing. I never did so many assessments in my life. So as a student in that program, I had to do lots of assessments, personality assessment, behavioral assessments, and so on. And so I have been able to use that in my coaching practice as well. And how I position it, it's for development. It's not for criticism. It's for looking at ways how you can grow and how you can do things differently. So that's one of the things I use in my business. And also, the art of listening. That's something that I learned very well in that program, the art of listening. And so when I speak to my coaching clients, I remind them about us having 2 ears and 1 mouth, you know, so that we listen twice as much as we speak.
Yeah.
And those are 2 of the main things that I have used from that, from psychology in business.
Very well said. And can you also describe the role of emotional intelligence when it comes to leadership, and how do you help people maybe to develop their emotional intelligence?
Yes. Ash, I think we've been around long enough, you and I, to remember the days when IQ was the star. And now EQ is what we're talking about. Because, of course, it's okay if you have to be bright. It's good to be bright, and you've learned and you've read and you are a scholar. And you come into an organization and you fail. Why? Because you do not have that emotional intelligence. You're not able to read the room. You're not able to understand yourself, your own emotional state, how to regulate yourself. So EQ is so important. Just this week, I was speaking with someone and she was talking about cultural intelligence and how, you know, closely aligned that is to emotional intelligence. And so when I say to my clients, you know, empathy is one of the things that will get you far. And you put yourself in the shoes of other people. Motivating yourself. Because when your team members see that you are motivated, that also sparks something in them. So emotional intelligence is a very important pillar for successful leadership.
Well said. I have time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
Next question is, what role does continuous learning play in leadership, and how do you encourage this among your coachees?
Continuous learning. Lifelong learning is one of the things that I've always said to myself, Georgia, the day you don't learn is the day you don't live. And I say that to my clients as well. Every day, try to make sure that you learn something new. And it doesn't have to be a structured program. It doesn't have to be a degree. It doesn't have to be a diploma. Once you are giving yourself that opportunity to learn from someone, to go to a workshop, to sit in a meeting and listen, to read something, to watch the news, that's part of learning. The day you shut yourself off from that, that's the day you stop having relationships. So lifelong learning is one of the things that if you want to be a successful leader, you have to open yourself to receive that.
Very well said. And my last question to you, Georgia, and this is for you personally. Given your amazing background as an HR leader, how have you been shaped by people in your life? And how are they influencing you as a coach today?
Yes, I'm a work in progress. And I always like to say that, because were it not for some significant people in my life, I wouldn't be where I am today. There are some women in my early days who took a chance on me. I started out right out of high school. I went into work, and then I went to university. And these women, and one particular gentleman who was my first boss, Alvin Henry, took a chance on me. He saw a spark, and he gave me an opportunity, and he gave me challenges. And that's one of the things that I'm saying to leaders: take a chance on people, because it has worked for me. So what have they done? They have told me that you have something in you, and this is how I'm going to help you to bring it out. So maybe a project, asking me to read something, do a vote of thanks at a meeting, different ways in which, you know, I would have a platform to launch myself. And these are the things that have worked for me. And because of that, I'm now trying to give people that same opportunity.
Wonderful. And on that note, Georgia, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey Thank you for speaking to me at such length about so many different aspects of human resources, an area that you clearly are so knowledgeable about, and one can see how senior you have been in different organizations. Thank you also for speaking to me about coaching and all the
Yeah.
work that you're doing to support so many individuals who are your coachees. Thank you for
Yes.
speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Ash. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.